obvious, which is the extraordinary times we are all living through. And we recognize that each and every one of you and the organizations that you represent have gone through a really challenging time and managed through, you know, a lot of uncertainty and chaos. And WERC has as well. I think we have done our best job to reduce costs. We have significantly changed the way we operate to respond to these circumstances. And we are executing well on the 3 strategic initiatives that are the central part of our strategic plan for the 2019 to 2021 strategic plan. And I want to say that I'm really proud of the WERC team and how they have responded and really come together as a team to continue to execute on behalf of our members. It really is extraordinary to be able to, as you will hear a little bit later, the significant progress that we have made in the first 6 months of this year in executing on our key objectives on behalf of members. And I want to, on that note, I'd like to welcome and recognize our newest staff member, Elizabeth Thielen, has joined WERC as managing director. She has stepped in immediately and helped to execute on our EDA contract. As you can imagine, and as you'll hear, there are a significant number of moving parts from renovation of the site, contracts with partners, designing curriculum, outreach to our members who are participating in the program. There are a lot of moving parts, and she stepped in a really meaningful way to help lead that effort, working closely with Jacqueline, who continues to run our overall talent initiative. I know many of you already know Elizabeth. Elizabeth has had a number of important roles in the innovation space. Vice President of Innovation and Tech Transfer at M7, obviously had where I think many people have run into her leadership role at the Water Council. Elizabeth brings a great combination of skills and experiences, and we're really pleased to have her on board. And you'll hear from Elizabeth in a little bit, talking about some of the talent initiatives that we're undertaking right now. So I would also like to just recognize this is our first virtual member meeting. So I think Emily on our staff and a lot of folks have worked really hard in pulling this together. We're crossing our fingers that the technology works, and I will say that we've had a couple of opportunities to do some practice, and things have gone well. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that today will also go really well. Could you bring up the agenda, please?
So we're all going to the beach.
Lovely.
Oh my.
Okay, let me just that's all right, Emily. I thought it was part of the slides. I'll just narrate. So we're going to begin here today, as I suggested, hearing from our key staff who have been leading in our 3 strategic initiative areas. You will hear that we've got some really exciting things. We're executing very well on some key priorities. And we wanted to share some of the highlights with members here today. And then Alan's going to sort of bring all of those together and lay out what is really beginning our next strategic plan. So our current strategic plan runs through 2021. We will later this year roll up our sleeves and really begin to pull together the strategic plan for 2022 through 2025. And so Alan's going to share some introductory thoughts as we begin to prepare for that. And then very excited to have Doug Scott, who is the Vice President for the Great Plains Institute and has been a great partner with WERC around this initiative that is the focus of today's meeting. So excited to have Doug here to share his thoughts on the process and the outcome. And then finally, we'll hear from a panel of our members, all of whom participated actively in the initiative that we're going to be talking about. And I want to recognize at the outset their significant contributions. As you will hear from Doug, there was a lot of time and effort over the course of a year that's gone into this process, and we asked a lot of our members, and we really appreciate their willingness to participate and significantly lead this effort overall. So we're excited about the program here today. We have a lot to cover, and I'm going to stop talking and introduce our first staff member who will talk about strategic initiatives. So Nate Conroy, who is the director of our Market Insights program, and a really great talent. We're pleased to have Nate continue to play this role for us. He's done a really great job over the course of the last 2 years, and really taking ownership and leadership for the Market Insights program. And I know all of our members who are part of the working groups see that every day. But thanks, Nate, for your leadership, and I'll turn it over to you at this point.
You bet, Dan. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So as a year-to-date review of Market Insights, I want to highlight a few of the things that we heard early on in the year and how we've executed on those things that you all as members let us know. So a lot of you spoke to us through some one-on-one interviews that Elizabeth Thielen and I did as a part of our membership inventory. And there were a few themes that came through loud and clear through those in-depth interviews. Some of them were things like working groups and WERC through its Market Insights initiative provide value when those programs deliver meaningful deliverables, things like white papers and events that facilitate meaningful networking and that produce outcomes that are backed by resources so that those outcomes can have big time impact. And so we've tried to take that to heart and put that into place throughout our working groups. I just want to highlight really quickly a couple of those initiatives for our different working groups that are taking that and putting it into practice. And again, I mention these in the hopes that a lot of you will join us in these efforts. Through our policy committee, we have the Wisconsin Energy Development and Technology Initiative. We're going to hear a lot more about that later at this meeting. In our distributed energy storage working group, we just submitted 2 major grants focused on biogas and anaerobic digesters to the Environmental Protection Agency. We're really excited about those and know that there's a lot of movement in the state and interest related to anaerobic digestion. In our industrial energy efficiency and energy water nexus working group, this year we are focused on drives. We just had a major event virtually hosted by ABB in Franklin, actually at their New Berlin facility, focused on variable frequency drives and how Wisconsin can lead in that growing market and the technology that Wisconsin is producing, right here in the state. That was an excellent event and is going to lead into a further fleshing out of our energy water nexus roadmap that was produced a few years ago. And again, we're going to update those numbers to provide market insights related to drives specifically. In our Smart Cities Technologies Working Group, we're just about to submit a major grant to the National Science Foundation. We're going to build upon the success that Milwaukee has seen in its smart kiosk program. These are the kiosks that are going in related to and near the streetcar in downtown Milwaukee. We want to leverage those in the Century City corridor to connect people with jobs and also build out that infrastructure that can enable smart cities technologies to really take off. And then lastly, in our construction and engineering working group, we've been focused on trying to develop programming related to energy efficiency and energy innovation in healthcare. As you can imagine, there's a lot of focus on the healthcare industry these days, and a lot of folks are talking about how perhaps this is a chance to further deploy innovation related to energy in healthcare. So we're very excited about that. And also in that working group or related to it, we're exploring opportunities to be working with the ISTO on standards development related to interoperability. So again, the theme here, lots of opportunities for you all to get involved. We'd love to have you involved. And what we're trying to do is really pursue opportunities for tangible deliverables that are backed by resources that can have a great impact for your businesses, for your institutions, and provide an opportunity for that cross collaboration of academia and industry. So very exciting year for Market Insights, and we look forward to working with more of you going forward.
Great, thanks, Nate. Emily, which one did we switch the order here? Which one's next? Okay, the technology innovation update. So really pleased also to introduce to Mariella Paz as a research assistant, program assistant who's been working with Bruce. Really, Mariella's the brains behind the operation and make sure the trains are running on time. She's really done a phenomenal job stepping in and helping, particularly on the extreme power conversion research project. But we're really pleased to have Mariella on board and helping us drive the technology innovation program. Bruce was planning on doing this presentation today. He was unfortunately pulled away in an all-day conference and meeting. So we've asked Mariella to provide the update here today. Mariella?
Thank you, Dan. And as he mentioned, my name is Mariella. I work with Bruce Byhoff and the WERC Madison office. We work closely with UW-Madison and Granger Institute for Engineering. This is our technology innovation update for energy powers and controls. You can go to the next slide, please. In technology innovation, we handle a few different pipelines and areas of interest, and I'll go over the first one, which is our newest area of focus, which is the PowerTech Navy concept proposal. That proposal was submitted in April and is currently being reviewed by the NAVSEA PMS 320 office. It outlines a new type of technology center, which is led out of Wisconsin. We've conducted reviews for that so far with NAVSEA, company sponsors, cooperating Wisconsin universities, and all of our interactions have been really supportive and encouraging. We've also received official letters of support from our companies and universities and have passed those forward to NAVSEA. During this review, we continue to work with our our Wisconsin team on our strategy, our management model, and our IP model. We also continue to detail out our infrastructure plans. We are refining our investment strategies and our research and technology investment fund. We are also looking forward, exploring opportunities including NavAir and NavFac and how they might be powerful additions to our tech center model. If you can go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, we have a few different areas of focus and pipelines. Our next one is extreme power conversion. Our 3-year research project in that area with UW-Milwaukee, UW-Madison, Marquette, DRS, Eaton, and LEM is underway. We've had really well-attended monthly conference meetings. These have provided valuable updates, insights, and feedback on both sides between our team. So far, we've demonstrated new meta models for designing optimized power structures, and we have positive early indications for pathway to major improvement in the use of wide bandgap semiconductors, which is the focus of that research project. Our interim report will be released in the coming month, and we are also navigating the COVID-19 restrictions involved in our laboratories, university laboratories especially. We are currently planning how to safely conduct work as they slowly reopen during the summer and into the fall months. And in future opportunities, we are also working with a fourth non-compete company who has indicated their interest in joining the research program. So we're really excited about that, expanding our XPC team and excited for them. We'll have updates on that in the near future. Thank you. And systems intelligence, we are reviewing our 2-year project between UW-Madison and A.O. Smith. That project will involve the use of machine learning and precision data analytics for intelligent process control. As we're building out the project scope, we're also searching for additional non-compete partners who are suitable to our stakeholders, and excited for that project, which has started in the early spring, and we're looking to continue into the fall. Go to the next slide, please. And finally, in addition to our research, we're always pursuing new research funding opportunities. Currently, we've formed an initial team to pursue a DOE EERE proposal for grid-enabled connected communities. That FOA is expected to be released in the next 4 weeks or so. And this focuses on strategies to improve the energy productivity, efficiency, and flexibility in grid-enabled buildings. In ongoing work, we're always searching for additional opportunities that highly align with our members. I can say personally that we're going through these proposal updates, looking to see what could be aligned with our members, reaching out to people. Many of the ones that we get done are just a few out of tens that we investigate first and see if they can be applicable. And looking forward, we are also paying close attention to a series of DOE FOAs and entitled Grand Energy Challenge Series. And that focuses on identifying market opportunities and challenges for the development and production of energy storage technologies. That is a kind of year-to-date technology innovation update.
Great, thank you very much, Mariella. As members can see, there's some really exciting opportunities. One, really continuing to execute on current research programs, working with members to help them solve technical challenges, but really, and this is the model that we're building here, is how do we leverage those efforts with significant additional resources coming from the federal government and potentially the state government. So we're excited about these opportunities to really have this vision be realized over the course of the next six to 12 months. So thank you, Mariella. And last, but certainly not least, I'd like to turn it over to Elizabeth Thielen to provide some updates in our talent development initiative.
Thank you, and I just want to say thank you for being part of an awesome team. I joined right around that pandemic time when we all shut down, and this team has just been moving along, as you can tell. So just to remind people, there is an agenda in the handout section if you want to look there, over to the right. And so MWERC has 3 areas. You just heard from the technology development and Nate with market insights, and talent development really has been led the last couple of years by Jacqueline Davidson. She actually is on the line, but she's just not feeling so good. So hey, Jacqueline, I am not subbing for her. She has her own style and own leadership, but I will summarize. So the first thing is Workbench Labs. We are just opened our application process for our 6th cohort. If you haven't seen it, you'll be seeing a link and all that information next week. October is our start date. 47 businesses over the last 5 years is amazing, and 42 still in business is also amazing. Startups, the stats are not that great for staying in business a long time, although in Wisconsin, small businesses actually stay in business longer than I think almost any other state. If Aaron's on the line, he can put that in the chat box. 2.8 million invested in the program, both by the state, MWERC, and our members. And again, these are all examples of the role of MWERC. We can convene all of you and more of you to get things done that you couldn't do by yourself. So accelerators is part of that, to be able to look at new technology. 40 million add-on funding 283 jobs created, and 5+ businesses are actually in our MWERC office and lab. Our ask here of you is to think about this. If you don't know any of those companies, call us and reach out. I think most of them are posted on our website, but if you actually have a tech challenge that you're dealing with, but you don't have the capacity to do it, that's what MWERC can do for you, is post a tech challenge as well. So the second part of talent development has been amazing. It's our training and development hub. And Jacqueline, we put in 2 before and after pictures. Again, I feel a little bad that Jacqueline's not delivering this for you. She's been managing this all along. The facility build out. So there's a messy picture on the right, and that was actually taken by us the other day. The construction company is in, pulling it all apart, and a nice clean picture on the left as we build out our training hub and lab and equipment, and that will be complete in October. The equipment is arriving as we speak. It's been funded by the Economic Development Agency and the state. We have just, like literally this week, we're finalizing our 16-week curriculum and working with partners such as MATC and Innovative Education Solutions Institute. We have a partnership with UWM for our EMI chamber, electromagnetic interference. For those of you who don't know what that is, maybe Alan, you could give, I hate to do this, this is ad-libbing, 1 minute on what is an EMI chamber.
So if you've seen the movie The Matrix, electromagnetic waves that impact electronic equipment, the chamber allows us to test new devices to see how susceptible they are to EMI as well as radio frequency. We will be the first major large chamber of a consortium in the state. We probably will have the largest chamber in the state, if not first or second. And we're excited to partner with UWM as we move forward with that.
Awesome. So we invite you in when that's available to not only look at, but use if you need some testing. On the next page, we have workforce partnerships that we're working on. This is actually IESI and an actual program. That's Jamie working. And MWERC, we are developing a whole career pathway for you in the energy, power, and control sector. And our first launch in October is an MWERC energy certificate. So people will go through a program. We're partnering with currently Eaton Faith and DRS, who are driving the actual competencies that are needed in their organizations. And these participants will be able to not only get a job, but continue to move on a pathway for certificates, associate's degree, and move on if they want to. We will coordinate that. And again, if you are interested, our ask of you is to call us, get involved. You can be part of the second cohort and drive those competencies. The results of all of this really is to increase the talent pool, both on the front end of a funnel when you're hiring entry level, but also on the innovation and technology end for the Accelerator Lab. So we invite you to participate in both of those programs. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Just a couple other notes. I think the Training and Development Hub is really a great example of how we can leverage federal resources, our partnership with the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation and the city. We recently also received some support from the city of Milwaukee to really help this Training and Development Hub become real. So it's another great example of how MWERC can bring together lots of different partners, as Elizabeth said, to realize some really significant value for members going forward.
And thank you, Jacqueline, if you can see the camera.
Yes, thank you, Jacqueline.
You might want to pull me off now.
Okay, so you've heard from our key leaders in under the 3 strategic initiatives. Now, Alan will spend a few minutes just shaping the future beyond our current strategic plan. Alan?
Yeah, I heard that operative word, just a few minutes. So I promise I'll be short. Next slide, please. So one of the things that I did was go back and look at our third strategic plan, which was from FY18 through 21, 19 through 21, excuse me. And one of the key parameters of that plan was to make sure that each of our product areas, our market insights, our talent, and our technology innovation were all pistons working together to really drive an engine collectively and efficiently. And it really looked at how each of those elements drove the energy, power, and control industrial cluster we were, and through both innovative resources in research, deployed new technologies, how in our talent development program, we ensured that we had the skill sets both to replace retirees and people who need to have a succession plan, as well as position new skill sets for tomorrow's applications. And just to refresh, the energy, power, and control cluster by the state of Wisconsin has been identified as one of the 3 driver engines for economic growth in the state. Economic development drives community development. In the state, there are 900 companies, nearly $30 billion of revenue, in excess of 100,000 jobs. And you've heard me say this, when you spin out to the 8 states contiguous, there's 500,000 jobs. And we really are the center of excellence of the country, if not the world, in energy, power controls and automation and control technologies. And why, from a macro perspective, there's going to be continued growth, it's clear. There's really explosive adoption of clean energy technologies, be it solar or wind, geothermal, energy storage, all really connected by power conversion systems. The entire world's looking to understand climate change, how to be a carbon neutral world, how to have a net zero world. And really the key to lots of that is getting renewables that electrify the way we go ahead and convert power. And that electrification process is fundamental. And the things that allow us to make that happen are drives, and all the new adaptive control systems that happen both in our industrial, our commercial, and even our building automation systems. So they all link those 3 key focus areas of WERC, both our market insights, looking where the market's going, knowing what industry needs, knowing what new technology innovations are required to continue to maintain that competitive advantage and be a leader in the industries, and how we ensure talent is available to go execute and be there for both today and for future generations. Next slide. So the nice thing is we're just wrapping up our fiscal year right now, and we are concluding the fiscal year in the end of June. And I looked, and we actually have a large backlog of contracts that are in process, entering the new year in 21 with over $1 million of grant money between EDA, WEDC, and that doesn't even include work that's being funded by a block grant from the city of Milwaukee in key areas, both in technology innovation and in research, as well as you'll see in talent. In the technology innovation, we do 3 areas. We do pre-competitive research, and we've done a lot of work with our corporation sponsors through a multi-university academic program called GRAPES. It's all about advanced grid technologies, and that's ongoing. And there's been at least $250,000 of research done in GRAPES through our member companies and partners last year. We do partnerships through sponsored research projects like Mariella was describing, and there is, in the coming year ahead, there's $250,000 to $500,000 of sponsored research, but in very specific areas. You, in April of 2018, identified that power conversion, we call it extreme power conversion, the connected enterprises through system intelligence and advanced manufacturing and systems were the key driver engines that we should put our money in. And so there are sponsored research that are on the books today in both power conversion, one large one being developed on the Internet of Things and connected systems on systems intelligence. And we wrapped up a very large one with Briggs & Stratton on advanced manufacturing processes. And we look forward to moving forward again with more sponsored research in 2021. We leveraged that sponsored research as seed money to really entice government partners and bring leverage to our research development so that we can get economies of scale and mass in programs. That Navy Power Tech program that Mariella walked through, in year one, there's a planning module of about $500,000. But if we follow the engineering research centers that the Navy put together, they then follow that up with a $5 million per year program to focus on key discriminator areas that are necessary both for Navy ship deployment on next generation technologies, but are also in the commercial and industrial roadmaps for deployment of wide bandgap semiconductors, next generation power devices, and things that increase power density, efficiency, while driving us towards a carbon neutral and a net zero world. So that Navy Power Tech really pivots and allows advances in grid technologies and even smart cities programs that we expect to meet our strategic planning goals, where we get back up to the $1 million range of research per year. It's really guided by market insights. Nate has done a phenomenal job of integrating each of those market insight working groups so that they too act like driver pistons, where they project what industry needs, both from a talent perspective and from a technology development perspective, and outline where we should put our funds to best afford membership advancement. We're happy to say that at the ABB Drive conference that we had last week, we kicked off what we see as strategically important to do a refresh on our roadmaps, looking at key cost-cutting technologies and saying these are the things in power conversion, and these are the things on connected systems across the internet that we really should look and explore and see what we thought was the right thing 3 years ago continues to drive tomorrow's requirements. So we're excited by both the research we're doing, the market insights and refreshes that we do. And next slide, I'll talk about the last thing, talent development. So each of our members said, we really need to refresh our workforce because a third to a half of the touch labor in many of our industry members can retire in the next 5 years. Our engineering staff, about a third of those can retire in the next few years. We went out for a research and development grant with EDA. And if you flip to the next slide, please. That grant represented the ability to go ahead and deploy new technologies, create a training program in WERC, and both be able to train touch labor on existing electrical assembly and testing requirements, along with beginning to look for what those wide bandgap semiconductors look like from the shop floor perspective. How do we create packaging and system architectures that are immune from EMI challenges, and how we can work and create a curriculum to train tomorrow's workforce on new EMI mitigation strategies. So we've been putting together a new lab. We're about to go build out the remaining 8,000 square foot of the second floor. You saw a picture that Elizabeth and Jacqueline put together. We started this week, and we look forward to seeing that turn into a next generation facility that has both space for UWM to go work in and do EMI research and development, to deploy that and work and interface that with in training programs with MATC, and then to work with hands-on partners who are the driver engines of pre-apprenticeship programs, both for advanced manufacturing and CNC machining, in electrical assembly and test, and will allow an average of about 50 to 100 of trained, deployed jobs to graduate, so that over the next 3 years, between 21 and 23, we will put in the marketplace 200 heads of trained, technically competent touch labor that could augment our workforce requirements of key members. So we're excited by that. I'm not sure why the next slide didn't advance, but I kind of walked through it anyhow. I'll go look on. Emily, is there a reason the next slide's not advancing?
Alan, there's a note in the chat that she doesn't have that slide, so if you can move on.
Okay, so like I said, I think I walked through how we are positioned. So both technology innovation, workforce development, and market insights position MWERC in the next 3 years to really meet the market requirements of future growth. We look to bring jobs here in Milwaukee and the surrounding regions and really help drive economic development for the state and community development for the neighborhoods where MWERC has its offices, both in the Milwaukee area and the Madison area. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Alan. All right, now we're going to move from the update to the topic at hand today. Really pleased to be able to introduce Doug Scott, who's the Vice President of Electricity and Efficiency at the Great Plains Institute. Doug has a lot of expertise in this area. He was the head of the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency from 2005 to 2011. He was the chair of the Illinois Public Service Commission. I'm going to call it a Public Service Commission, Doug. I know you don't call it there, but from 2011 to 2005, and he's been with Great Plains since 2015. And I've had an opportunity to work with Doug in a number of different ways. He is really an amazing talent. And he and the Great Plains model that they deploy to bring people together to help solve these difficult challenges is really extraordinary. They have a great track record. Doug has done a number of help facilitate and lead a number of these types of initiatives in the Midwest and really around the country. And we're really pleased, Doug, that you and your team were available to partner with us here, and have really appreciated the partnership with you and Trevor and the whole team at Great Plains. And thank you again for joining us here today. Doug?
Thanks, Dan. I really appreciate it. What a wonderful introduction. Thanks so much. And good morning, everybody. And it's great to be with you to discuss the Wisconsin Energy Distribution and Technology Initiative, or WEDI. And before you say it to yourselves or aloud, Dan and I would be the first to agree with you. I think that is a pretty awful acronym, but at least it conveys pretty well what the group was about. And so really looking forward to talking with you today about it, as well as listening to the panel for folks who were, as Dan said earlier, were very much involved in the process of putting together this process. And hopefully I'll leave some time. I don't know how we're going to do it, but I can leave a little time at the end for questions if you want to, or if you want to do it while I'm talking. If you want to do that through chat or something else, that's fine too. However works for you is fine. So, just at the outset, let me say what a joy it was to work with Dan and Emily and MWERC. I'll explain a little bit that my association with MWERC predates this process by a little bit, but really great to work with folks. And we typically at Great Plains, we will typically partner with organizations in the states we're working in, people who know the state better than we do. who can give us a lot of great information and help lead the discussions both during the meetings and between the meetings, which sometimes is as important. And Dan and Emily were wonderful at that. So I really appreciate being able to work with MWERC on this. And Dan mentioned my colleague Trevor Drake. Trevor does an amazing job for us working on a variety of projects, a lot of them dealing with utility business model and innovation like we're talking about here, but in a variety of other things as well. So I really appreciate being able to work with Trevor. So if we can go to the next slide, Emily. Thank you. So I'm going to try to do a few things here in the time I have with you this morning. This is just a brief look at the agenda. I want to let you know about the process. You know, that the recommendations themselves, we'll spend a lot of time in the weeks ahead talking about them, and you could probably do a half an hour on any of the recommendations that the group made. But I want to tell you a little bit about the process, because I think that's really important to understand how we got to the point where we ended up with these recommendations and with a final report. And also how it got, not only how it got started, but what the report says, of course, which is very important, but also what it means going forward, and how Wisconsin now will be looked at by other states, because you know, if they say the NFL is a copycat league, energy planning and distribution planning is a copycat league as well. And so people will look at Wisconsin now and look at what you did here as part of their processes as well, and see if there's some lessons that they can learn from what happened in Wisconsin. I think there are some pretty good lessons as well. Emily, can we go to the next slide, please? So we could spend a lot of time talking about this slide, and people do. You will be able to find, if you look, no end to webinars and discussions and white papers about how the utility business model is changing, how the distribution system is changing throughout the country. Clearly, there are a lot of changes going on in the electric distribution system. I mean, the old joke is that if Alexander Graham Bell came back today, he wouldn't have any idea what the phone system looks like or how it operates. But if Edison and Insull came back, and they would say, yeah, I recognize that the electric distribution system, it kind of looks like it did when I left it. But that's changing. It's changing for a variety of reasons. One is the changing technology, which is really important to the WEDI process as well. You know, even simple things like, you know, power used to be set up with large generating stations. Power flowed one way through transformers, through the distribution system into our homes and businesses. But now people are putting solar on their roof and sending power back into the distribution system. And people are setting up microgrids and doing other things that are very different than the way the system was originally planned. You've got things, technology like storage and electric vehicles and other beneficial electrification, advanced meters, things like Nest thermostats, all kinds of stuff where the customer starts taking charge a little bit more. And that's very different than the system that we had before. The load characteristics are different than they were before. You know, the system was built up as kind of you know, based on a business model of trying to electrify the entire country, and that worked, and it worked extremely well for over 100 years of trying to build out an electric distribution system to try to bring power to all parts of the country. But now what you're seeing, and it was always based on a business model where load was always increasing. That's changing now. In a lot of places, load is either flat or declining. We're seeing even greater examples of that during COVID, where the load shape has changed a little bit in some places, but pretty much demand for power is down everywhere. Well, if your business model is built up on producing, excuse me, on producing more power and selling more power, if that's part of the business model, obviously that's going to cause some changes as well. There are clearly a lot of environmental concerns now people are very interested in where their power comes from and in what they can do either through efficiency or renewables to having cleaner power on the system. And the last one, the Wisconsin technology opportunity in terms of why we do a process in Wisconsin is really key. All that changing technology that I talked about earlier, a lot of Wisconsin companies make things or supply things that can be utilized in this changing technology on the distribution system. A lot of MWERC members are doing that as well. And so one of the main thoughts of this process would be to try to figure out what could help advance the clean energy economy in Wisconsin and try to add to the clean energy jobs that already exist and really prepare for the future here in Wisconsin. Next slide, please. Dan mentioned a little bit about what Great Plains does, and for those of you that don't know us, we're a little over a 20-year-old not-for-profit based in Minneapolis. We do have a philosophy, although we clearly our goal, if you look at our website, is centered around decarbonization, and we do that through a variety of different projects, whether that's in transportation or in things like utility business model and distribution systems, carbon capture and other carbon management, as well as working with individual states and regions on different decarbonization goals that they have. We do a lot with transmission work, for example, as well. But we're not the typical not-for-profit in that we don't try to drive our agenda in the processes that we're part of. What we try to do is find processes that we think are important and try to help bring a lot of people together that might have very different views on the subjects, bring them together and see if we can help through facilitation and help through our own experience, try to help them find solutions together and working on some of these complex issues. So along with the Center for Energy and Environment in Minnesota, we started the E21 project there. That's led to a whole bunch of other ensuing projects in Minnesota, working with Minnesota Power and Xcel and stakeholders on things like time of use rates, distribution planning, integrated resource planning, demand response, performance incentive mechanisms, and many other things as well. We've also worked in other states. I've mentioned Rhode Island, the power sector transformation process that took place out there. And I'm going to talk at the end about how Wisconsin fits into Minnesota, Rhode Island, and the other states and what they were doing. But we took part in that process as well. We're starting a brand new process that's just starting now in Maine. Doing something very similar to what we did in Wisconsin. Be a bit of a trick to do that one virtually, but we're going to give that a try out of necessity. We've also consulted in other processes, like in the Ohio Power Forward process, and we've done presentations at MWERC and other places before, and participated in discussions around Wisconsin. We've worked with Madison Gas and Electric, for example, and worked with a lot of Wisconsin entities on other, I mentioned some of these regional projects that we've done, worked with pretty much all the utilities in Wisconsin on something called the Mid-Continent Power Sector Collaborative, which was a look at providing roadmaps that could show how decarbonization could happen in the Mid-Continent states, the MISO footprint. So we had a lot of experience working in and around Wisconsin as well. A few years ago, Jeff Anthony and Art Harrington asked me to do a couple presentations to MWERC, and we did some facilitation at the time. And about that time, Dan Ebert and I started talking about whether a stakeholder process for Wisconsin would make sense, would be valuable. I think we both thought it would be, and so mostly Dan, but Dan and I started talking to other stakeholders in the area and found a real critical mass of people who wanted to work on a group, and we found some foundation money and went to work on this process. In any process like this, and you can go to the next slide, Emily, if you would, please. In any process like this, thank you. the right entities are important. I mean, if you're going to be talking about the electrical distribution system in Wisconsin, there are certain entities that absolutely have to be at the table. But also you're trying very hard to get the right people from those entities too. I mean, to try to get a group together that are willing to test out ideas, willing to collaborate with others, give each other a good-natured hard time, which this group was very good at as well. But really to kind of build that kind of sense of a shared purpose where you're actually trying to work toward making some recommendations that everybody thinks on the whole will be beneficial for your state. So that's the process that we set about here. And I have to say, this was a tremendous group of stakeholders, and I know a lot of you are on this webinar today. But really a really great group of people who dug in, worked extremely hard for a year. Our first meeting, first in-person meeting for this group was a year ago this week. So for an entire year, these folks really dug in and were willing to share different ideas. We're willing to test out different things and really talk through some very difficult issues as well. So we set up rules, the Chatham House, or as we like to call them, the Vegas rules, which means nothing for attribution. So when you read the final report, you will see a whole lot of ideas that are out there and a whole lot of discussion and reference to discussion that happened, but you won't see anything attributed to any individual person. And the reason that that's important is so that people feel free and comfortable in a setting like this to express all the views that they think they need to express, either individually or on behalf of the entities that they are representing. Consensus is important, and what consensus means here is that look at the recommendations as a package. And there may be an individual thing or a sentence in recommendation 8 that you may not agree with, but look at it as a whole. Is this a package of recommendations that you could support? And so we were very fortunate to have a group that was looking toward building consensus and that actually came up with 14 consensus, we think very good recommendations as well. So start off with a level setting. You know, where are we in Wisconsin right now with our distribution system? What's good? What needs work? Early on, found interest that in not kind of blowing up the whole system, but in making some strategic changes and some strategic recommendations that would improve the operation of the system to the benefit of customers, to the benefit of businesses that are supplying some of the technology changes we talked about earlier. And we took those issues that folks set out for us, the things that they wanted to discuss more, and set a schedule for that, brought in outside experts. Sometimes the outside experts were from the same entities that were represented at the table, but maybe a different part of the same company or entity. But then we also brought in people from around the country to talk about some of these issues as well, some of the subject matter experts. If you go to the next slide, please, Emily. Thank you. So we set us organizing principles. You have the slide deck, you'll get it. So I'm not going to read these to you. But the reason that this is important is because this is kind of the touchstone that folks come back to. So it's important for the group to set these organizing principles. First of all, it's good for them in terms of being able to work together. But they set these principles that both recognizing there's an underground transition, but there's some significant opportunities and some things that you always want to keep in mind. So no matter what your recommendations are, you always want to maintain affordability, efficiency, and reliability for customers. Try to make your solutions as flexible as you can so that they'll last through several technology changes. And so things like this are kind of the touchstones that you come back to as a group when you're trying to develop principles. And this group was very good at doing that, and several times during the process would refer back to the organizing principles that we established early on. Next slide, please. So in those initial discussions where we're doing the level setting and talking about what's working and where there are some changes that could be suggested, or even just updates to things that are working well, but maybe need to be updated based on current technology and events. So these were the main buckets of issues that we started working through. So grid mod and storage, distributed generation, looking at the RTO and their influence on a lot of the technology and changes. All of those issues of interest, then we took those, and those then became the subject of some of our meetings where we brought in the experts to talk about it. So we would develop issues as we were talking with the experts and as we were brainstorming ourselves as a group on each of these issues, and then that led to a whole set of issues that are also identified. And when you read the report, in the back of the report, you will see all of the fruits of those discussions are all set out. So you can see not only the recommendations, but you can also see kind of the showing our work, kind of seeing where those recommendations came from in terms of the discussion that took place. And if you want to go to the next slide, please. So then we went to subgroups. So we looked at, we put 4 subgroups together. I apologize, I got a little squinched at the bottom there. So after discussing each of those issue sets, we broke, Dan and Emily and Trevor and I broke that into 4 different subgroups. The behind the meter subgroup, utility and regulatory innovation, customer consumption, and wholesale markets and transmission. And we, and the idea then to be for the subgroups to flesh out the recommendations that would then be brought back to the larger group for vetting. Members of the stakeholder group co-chaired each of the subgroups, and then GPI and MWERC were on all of the calls to take notes and help better understand where the recommendations were going. We'll go to the next slide. Thank you. So I'm not going to go into great detail on these. The report is available very soon. It is finished now, and we're just in the process of figuring out the right distribution for the report. The whole report is 48 pages long. The recommendations section to read all of them is about 18 pages. And I think it's a pretty easy or fairly quick read to go through. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through the individual recommendations, but I do want to point out, maybe a thing or two about each of them. The position utilities as conductors is really important for the entirety of the report and the entirety of the recommendations. Again, people not really interested in blowing up the whole system and doing something completely different than we're doing. And also recognizing that a lot of the recommendations that are being made, that the utility is really in the best position to manage the system. They've been doing it, they're really in the best position to manage it, but with oversight from the Public Service Commission. And so that recommendation really kind of underscores all of the rest of the recommendations, and in a way separates Wisconsin from a lot of other states. This is something that we haven't really seen in a similar fashion in other places where we've worked, or other places where have done similar processes that we've studied. But I think it was really important for this group to recognize that as a fully regulated, vertically integrated state, this was probably the best way to make some recommendations that could make some changes that could be adapted fairly quickly and have really good benefit for the system without unduly, affecting reliability or affordability, the other things that were important in the principles. The interconnection rules are something that's being updated really everywhere. They're looking at it, doing some work in Illinois right now. It's a huge part of the discussion there, because as more renewables come onto the system, how they get onto the system, where they get onto the system, what it costs to get onto the system, all of those things are very important. And so the recommendation is through the Public Service Commission in Wisconsin to start a process that's going to look at updating the interconnection rules. Very important as we talk about bringing more renewables onto the system. Establish an Innovative Technologies Initiative is really looking at pilot programs, and this is also at the crux of what these recommendations are doing, because it really goes to the heart of WERC and trying to advance different technologies and try to do so in a way, not just Wisconsin, but lots of places all over the country. The analogy of utility regulation kind of moving like an ocean liner is really true. It's not a nimble business. It doesn't pivot on a dime. But it's the utilities and the system are set up to be very risk averse. And so the idea is to try to figure out some ways, and this group was really working hard to try to figure out some ways to integrate new technology, make some technological changes, do some things that will help the system, make it ready for the 21st century, but do so in a way that's responsible. And so some of these innovative technology pilots are one of the ways to do that. The stakeholder collaboration really got a lot of discussion from the groups, and is very important for a lot of reasons. I'm a former regulator, as Dan told you. I can tell you my own personal opinion is that doing new technology or doing changes through rate cases may be one of the worst ways to make change in a system. And so what the group is looking at is ways that there can be some more voluntary collaboration between the utilities and stakeholders to try to vet some of these proposals out, maybe before they get to the commission in the first place, but at least to have that ongoing dialogue that something like the WEDI process really promotes, getting to work with each other and understand as best you can where everybody else is coming from. It makes a huge difference. The key is not to make it onerous, not to make it kind of a box checking exercise, and the group was a lot of discussion about how best to do that is part of recommendation number 4, and I think it's very, very important going forward for the state. If we go to the next slide, the foster innovation for low-income multifamily renters is very important, because as all of these changes happen, and this is a discussion that's going on everywhere as well, what you don't want to do is make a bunch of changes that may help the overall system, but that really overburden, folks who are disadvantaged and folks who may be struggling to make ends meet. That's especially true now, as we're seeing with COVID. And this group was very engaged in trying to make sure that all of their recommendations would fit into whether this is a new reality or part of a different part of the old reality, or whatever phase we're in right now, recognizing that there may be some significant changes coming out of the stage that we're in right now, but making sure that whatever we do provides some opportunities as well as some protection for low-income multifamily and renters. That's typically a space where people are very interested in cost, but it's very difficult a lot of times to try to move significant policies forward that will make technology and some of the technological changes available and useful for folks that fall in those categories. Aligning the focus on energy with carbon reduction and clean energy goals, obviously very important going forward. Taking a look at focus programs, and focus is a very good program and the very good acclaim from inside the group, as well as well recognized outside of Wisconsin. But maybe take a look and see if there are some long-term goals that focus could look at as well. Taking a look at whether it's 2050 or wherever the clean energy targets are for Wisconsin, trying to make the focus programs enhance the progress toward those 2050 goals. Shaping energy consumption to achieve utility and state goals, again, goes back to kind of the utility as conductor as well. We spent a lot of time talking about different ways that utilities could better optimize and maximize the system to help customers out, to advance the clean energy goals, but also to do it in a way that minimizes the cost on the system, that benefits all customers, whether they're taking advantage of particular programs or not. And so that's what recommendation 8 goes to. Recommendations 9 through 12 came out of the subgroup that was looking at MISO and the wholesale grid, and really what they all speak to, and I think just talk about them collectively, is really the value to the system of distributed energy resources, getting better information to MISO, having MISO provide better information to potential suppliers about how new distributed energy resources, new wind, new solar, other forms of energy, how that can fit in to things like demand response, how that can fit into MISO's planning going forward. And the recommendation also, you'll see one there if you go to the next slide, Emily, which also suggests, really paying not necessarily closer attention, but paying some fairly specific intentional attention to MISO and their processes, so that we can help move some of these innovations that we want to do in Wisconsin forward. And so really 9 through 12 speak to working with MISO, trying to make the information better for all parties concerned, including MISO, so that they can help better integrate these things into their planning processes. Again, the goal from a clean energy standpoint would be to use more distributed energy, more wind resources, less of the kind of the standard central station resources that we talk about, as a lot of those are closing and being replaced with renewables and efficiency and other systems. So trying to make that work on the wholesale market as well as on the distribution system is really the point of that subgroup and those 4 recommendations. And the last 2, the act quickly is not meant to be funny. It's actually a serious recommendation, because utilize the PSC processes wherever possible. Early upfront negotiations between stakeholders and utilities for proposals brought to the PSC. Try to move some things along fairly quickly. For the most part, other than things dealing with MISO, what you're seeing in terms of these recommendations are things that can be done through the PSC. So we're not talking about a lot of legislative changes here. These are mostly things that can be done either by stakeholders themselves or by stakeholders working through the PSC. And the last one, providing economic stimulus, obviously perhaps even more important than when we started, because of what's happened economically because of the COVID virus. But everything in mind, with the mind toward stimulus, creating jobs. In 2019, for example, clean energy jobs in Wisconsin were about 76,000 jobs, and focus on energy contributions to the economy were about $500 million. I mean, really a huge impact that focus has on the economy. And then when you figure in 76,000 clean energy jobs, some related to focus, some not, but that's obviously a huge part of the economy, and will be an even bigger part going forward. And so the idea behind all these recommendations is always have a mind toward what's going to happen next and providing economic stimulus. If you go to the next slide. As a whole, these recommendations, when you look at them, I think what you'll find are a couple of themes. Better information for everybody involved in the process. Some additional dollars for clean energy technology and pilots, trying to bring on clean energy as efficiently and economically as possible, trying to benefit the most customers that you possibly can, whether it's commercial, industrial, or different classes of residential customers as well. Utilizing Wisconsin technology resources, and trying to do things that are better for customers and better for the state. So the report will be disseminated to the PSC, to legislators, to the administration. We will have it on our websites, both on MWERC's and GPI's websites. Stakeholders can disseminate this as well. The report as well to the group of folks that they interact with. We'll do presentations to interested groups. I think Dan and I already have a couple of those lined up to be doing here in the near future. And then hopefully to utilize these going forward as providing touchstones for future policy discussions, because well, one thing that I found in all my public policy work is that, the fact that you bring a large group of folks together that come at these issues from very different places, that means something for policymakers, because it's a good place to look for policy upgrades and changes. The next slide, what happens next? We've talked through, but just to talk about it in terms of how this fits in, and this is really my last slide, how this fits in around the nation. There is no one size fits all to these processes. Hawaii really had a major kind of upending type process where they re-looked at everything that they were doing, but they did it because they have incredibly high energy prices. And if you think about it, other than renewables, everything that they were using, every kind of fossil fuel that they were using had to be imported. So it was driving their costs up tremendously. So they had this huge push to renewable power and needed to figure out the way that their distribution system and their generation system could work with that. New York, after Hurricane Sandy, went through the reforming the energy vision process, again, crisis driven, but again, an entire upending of the system, which has been going on for several years now, isn't finished yet, still has a lot of work to be done on it. And I think Trevor and I can tell you that every time we go into a new state to talk to them, the first thing they want to tell us is, we're not New York. We're not looking to do what New York did. So again, very different situation there. Minnesota, no crisis. The stakeholders got together and as one of the organizers said, we started planning for this when we didn't have to, because Minnesotans are used to planning for winter. So that seemed to work for Minnesota. Rhode Island was driven by a governor's initiative wanting to get more renewable energy and more energy efficiency onto their system. The Ohio Power Forward was a PUC-led system where they brought in experts from all over the country and did 3 sets of 2 weeks each, every day, all day, listening to people from around the country on a variety of different issues, and then they came up with their own roadmap of some of the things that they'd like to do. There's a brand new process in Maine focused on decarbonization. They're going to be using, we're going to be working there, and we're going to be using a game plan very much similar to what we used in Wisconsin. So that's one place where Wisconsin's influences are already taking hold. I don't know what to say about Illinois Next Grid. They started with a major process that ended up with a court order saying you couldn't use it for anything because of the way that the process had happened. So not a good example, but a way to show that these processes don't always work the way that people want them to. And I think your technology approach in Wisconsin is going to be one that people are going to look at and emulate. And also the way that you did it, both in terms of process and also in terms of trying to do some things that are not around the margins, because there's a lot of really, really substantial recommendations in here, but kind of taking the existing system and trying to figure out the ways to make that better rather than upending and changing the whole system. So I think you've got obviously I'm biased, but I think you've got a really nice product for the state and for customers of the energy system in the state, and I think it's going to be emulated quite a bit throughout the rest of the country, because frankly everybody's looking at these issues in one form or another. So with that, again, thanks. It was a pleasure to work with MWERC on this project, and looking forward to where it goes from here.
Doug, thank you very much. Really appreciate the presentation here, and just echo what I said at the beginning. The partnership with Great Plains was really phenomenal. So thanks for your leadership, all the hard work that you and Trevor in particular put into this. It's really, it's been a great process from our perspective as well.
Thank you.
So I would like to amplify a couple of points, Doug, if that's all right.
Sure, please.
So Doug mentioned the new technology initiative. And I think, from the MWERC perspective, when you think about companies that are building and creating systems that can help utilities manage in this new utility world, companies like Johnson Controls, companies like A.O. Smith, Generac Kohler, Franklin Energy, Faith Technologies. You know, the recommendation that will, I think, ultimately help us the most is the New Technology Initiative. And the goal here is really to signal to the market that Wisconsin believes we need to move faster through this transition, really accelerate the deployment of new technology in the utility space, the framework here. And they put some targets out there for people to think about. And the report suggests $100 million a year for 5 years. So when you think about the potential economic development potential, not only for the companies that I mentioned who are designing solutions that will work in this new world, but also for companies that want to take more control of their own energy use, to take advantage of new technologies. We had two great companies that were part of this process, not members, but Charter, Steel, and Quad Graphics, who were really interested in this because of the potential for them to also better manage their energy use going forward. So the economic development potential is not just for the companies whose business models are providing solutions, but also for the business community as a whole, to help them better manage going forward and take advantage of the opportunities presented by technology. So I really want to amplify that. I mean, if you think about it, you know, we're suggesting $100 million a year for 5 years. That is a fairly significant investment in new technologies that can really help drive economic development. Now, those are suggested targets. Obviously, the commission and the utilities are, you know, will need to work through that process, and we're calling for an expedited review or a pre-approval process. Obviously, that's something the commission is going to have to take the leadership on. But even if we come close to that, it should send a very strong signal to the market in Wisconsin and for companies that are in that space or want to take advantage of technologies that there are some really exciting opportunities in Wisconsin. So I just wanted to amplify that point. Obviously, Doug did a tremendous job working through all the recommendations. I agree with Doug's characterization that, you know, these are not revolutionary, these are evolutionary changes. But they are significant changes and really will result in, assuming the commission can move forward with them and will move forward with them, and that the utilities and other stakeholders really embrace these, we can accomplish the goal of accelerating deployment and driving economic development. So, again, thanks, Doug.
Thank you.
So let me just see if there are any questions. And I think folks can use the questions tab on the control panel. They could go like this and raise your hand. And Emily, who is quarterbacking us here today, can recognize you going forward. So let's see if there are any specific questions.
We've got one in the chat, Dan.
There's 3 of
Okay.
them.
Okay, question. In regard to high electricity costs, the Great Plains Institute has been a visible promoter of transmission and utility expansion, and now seems to be moving into end user efficiency and distributed generation. Cutting waste and avoiding the use of grid power on the user end has been far more effective at reducing CO2 emissions. Is it monetarily realistic to keep asking ratepayers to pay for major utility expansions and end user efficiencies at the same time?
Yeah, I would, well, the short answer would be no. And so the idea is to in both of those cases, to do things that you think are going to have a benefit to the ratepayers, either in terms of the energy that they're getting in or the use of the system. And that's why on the distribution side, for example, we talked about having the different recommendations be toward figuring out ways to A, use less energy, or B, be able to manage the energy on the system such that you're maximizing and optimizing the distribution system that will benefit all ratepayers on the cost side. On the transmission side, what a lot of the transmission expansion that's going on or needed is to bring renewable energy into places that don't have it, that are looking for it, and in many cases as the cheaper electricity that'll be found. And so I would say in both cases, you know, if the premise of the question is, you know, both these things are going to be more expensive for the customer, I don't necessarily think I agree with that, because I think the goal in both cases, whether it's on the MISO side, on the transmission side, trying to get more DERs like the report suggests, or on the distribution side, all those things are designed at trying to optimize the system to provide greater benefit for all the customers. So that's the goal of trying to reach that. And again, for something like the funding for the innovative technology that Dan's talking about, the idea would be to invest some dollars that are going to pay you even greater dividends in the future, both in terms of the optimizing the system and the economic benefits for Wisconsin, for the technology advances in Wisconsin.
Great, thanks, Doug. Another question from the chat. Did we discuss the issue of how to deal with stranded assets resulting from rapid movement to more cost-effective renewable energy?
No, not a whole lot. Yeah, that was one that we did not talk about. I mean, there are a lot of ways that can be done, and it's being done in different places around the country. Things like accelerating depreciation through things like securitization and other things. But no, that's not something that we talked about in the group. And Dan, I don't know if you wanted to add to that, but.
No, again, I think with the focus of our group really focusing on accelerating the deployment of new technology, obviously there are a number of issues that we didn't as a group get into. One was third-party ownership.
Right.
And we specifically parked that outside this process because it's in litigation right now. And we were really looking for how do we bring stakeholders together. And I would say that the stranded assets issue is another one of those issues. Wasn't directly implicated in our process, but clearly there has been a fairly vigorous conversation in Wisconsin around stranded assets. I would expect that conversation will continue. And ultimately, I would expect that the commission will, on its own and through things that are brought to it, be dealing with that issue going forward. So I would expect we'll see a lot more on stranded assets, but we did not, as a group, take on that issue. Okay, we got a lot of questions here. Emily, could you recognize Mark? Mark, you may only ask one of your questions. Mark Stira. Emily, is that working? Okay, let me just read it out. Let's see. How do we access the report? Doug mentioned it will be available publicly next week. It will be available on the WERC website and the Great Plains website, and from any of the stakeholders going forward. So it will definitely be out there. Any other?
And I would just add to that, Dan, too, that if people read it and have questions, feel free to shoot them to me, and I assume to you as well, Dan. Happy to answer questions when people dig in a little bit further into the report.
Yeah. So Charles Benzinger asked, how likely is it that monopoly utilities, the PSC, MISO, will allow third parties to provide independent generated energy at a fair price?
Well, I think a lot of the, if you look at the recommendations that are there, I think the idea is to establish things that are going to do better in terms of competition and allowing different providers to be able to offer different things in. That's where some of the innovation comes from that Dan talked about a little bit earlier. I don't know. I mean, trying to guess what the PSC might do or how it might come to them, and what their options are in terms of a particular case is pretty difficult to do. But clearly, from this group's standpoint, at least maintaining the vertically integrated, fully regulated business model that exists today was something that was important to the group as a whole. There may be some differing opinions as to how that happens, but I think, from a group perspective, working with the existing utilities to try to figure out ways to maximize the system was the main focus of it, not necessarily other generators and things like that. Dan, I don't know if you want to add to that.
No, thanks, Doug.
Okay.
Okay, let's turn now to our members. For folks who have questions, Doug will be sticking around and be available for additional questions, but I'd like to move on to our panel at this point. Pleased to have a really distinguished panel here today. As I think I mentioned earlier, each of these four individuals were actively involved in this process. And again, I thank you for that time and effort. First, we have Art Harrington, who is an attorney with Godfrey and Kahn. Second, Dan Terrence, who is a senior executive with Franklin Energy. I didn't know, Dan, whether you wanted to make any announcements here today. I'll leave that up to you when your time comes up. Deb Irwin, Manager of Regulatory Affairs from Xcel Energy, and Steve Nealon, Vice President of Energy Systems for NTEC, which is a new spin-out from Faith Technologies. And Steve, I'll let you describe exactly what I don't know if it's a subsidiary or if it's a separate company. I'll leave that up to you to describe. Just a couple of comments about our panel. First of all, to recognize Art and Dan and their leadership as the co-chairs of our policy committee for the last 4 years. I think it's fair to say that they are significantly responsible for having us here today and having us move forward with this effort. Their leadership on the policy committee, I think, has helped us find a sweet spot on how we can take advantage of the breadth and depth of our organization and our technical expertise and our focus on economic development without crossing the lines into advocacy. And sometimes that line's a little blurry, but I think your leadership has really been important to getting us to this point here today. Deb Irwin, Deb and I have gone through a number of different battles. Deb and I work together on the Public Service Commission, but she brings a really great and perspective to this, and is probably one of the harder workers in Wisconsin in energy policy. So thanks for that. And Steve, again, have really appreciated Faith's partnership and contributions. We're looking forward to your presentation here today. So I'll start, go across the board, start with Art.
Thanks, Dan, and I'll try to keep my comments so that we can hopefully open some time for questions too. I think it's important, but I wanted to mention, I'm hoping with Doug Scott's great results at this Wisconsin project at MWERC, they'll think about rechanging their name from the Great Plains Institute to the Great Dairylands Institute. I think they've just done a marvelous job, as you've indicated, Dan. And I can't say enough about the positive experience working under their direction and assistance. I wanted to spend a few minutes on three things. I want to talk a little bit about my experience because I bring a bias to this on the need for collaboration and how this resulted in, I think, an amazing result because of the Great Plains Institute on the consensus that WERC has developed with a very diverse group of stakeholders. I want to talk about that. I also want to talk, and I think it was a very important slide that Doug mentioned as part of his preparation, his presentation, observations about the energy markets and why this consensus report is so incredibly important, I think, for Wisconsin. And also just some observations from me personally about the WDTI consensus and the process. So those are three things I'd like to talk about, Dan. First of all, my bias. I'm very biased towards collaboration. I teach an energy law course at Marquette Law School, and I teach an energy course and technology course with two other engineering professors at Marquette Engineering School. Why do I think that's important? Because so much of what we do in the energy area is in silos. And to me, I bring a bias here on the need for collaboration to come up with innovative solutions. And this whole process, I think, underlies the importance of that. So I just want to give you that little background on myself in terms of my bias coming into this process. Some observations about the energy markets that I think are really important background to amplify some things that Doug talked about. Technology changes. I don't think there's anybody on the 140 people on this call who will dispute the fact that there are more technology changes in the energy market in the last 10 years than in the previous 100. And that's why this effort is so very important in terms of the rapidity of technology changes and how we deal with that in the energy markets. The other thing I want to make an observation is demand curve changes. Doug mentioned this, but we had a lot of discussions about what's going to happen with EVs as we start planning, and the charging stations and the demand loads, instantaneous demand loads, if they're not dealt with in a proactive way as we start planning for those issues. Tremendous potential technological change in the future, and how this is going to be managed and how it's going to affect demand curve changes. The COVID, short-term and long-term changes. You know, we talked about this as part of our discussions in this committee effort. We're seeing short-term changes where people are working remotely and how that's affecting demand changes, you know, throughout the demand curve. How will that continue even after we find a solution to COVID, and thinking a little bit about technology and how that's going to be dealing with. The other thing is, and Dan and Doug mentioned this, the tremendous impacts on the decrease of heavy manufacturing and the load changes and the needs for finding markets with this infrastructure we have already. I think those are incredibly important things to make observations on. Supply changes, you know, the intermittent effect of the significant emergence of wind and solar and how we're going to deal with that. Doug talked about that, the cost changes and how we're going to integrate all that into our grid system, the supply changes. And also, we spent a lot of time with great presentations on battery storage. You know, the cost effectiveness is not here yet, but we as a committee think that this is another incredibly important technological change on the supply side that we've got to think about on grid impacts. The last thing we talked about but didn't have a lot of recommendations on is grid cybersecurity issues. As we start thinking about more interconnections, think about charging stations, think about the things that Doug talked about with the customer starting to control and monitor his or her energy use. What does that represent on the cybersecurity concerns as well? We didn't spend a lot of time on that, but we recognize that is an emerging area. The final thing I'll just say in terms of things we noted as part of our deliberations are policy considerations and what's happening. And let's just talk about the FERC area. This is a time of enormous contentious and policy issues at the FERC side. Let me just mention a few. Net metering, the issue of whether FERC is going to try to take jurisdiction on net metering, very contentious issue. Battery storage, access to the grid, we talked a lot about Order 841 and how that's going to impact RTOs and making battery storage as it emerges, access to the grid. There's a very contentious minimum offer pricing rule that's being dealt with and how that could impact renewables. FERC is also dealing with just this week on PURPA and how that is going to be implemented through rulemaking on changes and how that will affect renewable energies. We did not get into these contentious issues, as Dan and Scott mentioned, but it's a reality that it's important to think about technological changes and how this is playing out on the regulatory side. I think it's important. The last thing I just want to mention is this WETI process. I personally want to give shout outs to the following groups of individuals, because I think this is such a remarkable result, not because of any involvement I had, but because the involvement of other people on this committee. And I want to, first shout out is for the PSC and state staff that were participating in every committee meeting we had. And I'm going to shout out to Carrie Templeton, Maria Redmond, and Joe Fontaine. It was critical, I think, to our deliberations to get their viewpoints as staff members in terms of all the things we were talking about, and the fact that they were there and committed was incredibly important, I think. The other shout out I want to give is, I mean, just talk about these subcommittees like the regulatory innovation. The fact that we had two committee chairs, Tom Content and Deb Irwin, and the fact that with their diversity of interest that they represent, that we could come out with innovative consensus, I think is remarkable, and it's a reflection, I think, on the skill set that that Great Plains brings to this, and their chairmanship on some of the innovations that Doug talked about, and some of those recommendations I think are very important. The other shout out I want to give is to you, Dan. I don't know that our membership appreciates enough your background on the PSC and how that was so effective in our committee deliberations. There were numerous times where we were involved in difficult issues where we couldn't kind of gain consensus, and your background and skill set, I think, was remarkable, working with Doug to find ways that we could avoid contentious issues and get to consensus. And the final thing I'll just say is it's remarkable to me to have had this diversity of interests. If you look at that list of people that participated, and it was remarkable because almost every meeting, everybody participated, given the busy schedules that they had. And the fact that we could come out with consensus on all these recommendations, to me, is nothing short of remarkable. And I think that's why MWERC deserves special praise for sponsoring this effort. And I think this is going to have an important impact on technology as the PSC starts dealing with, because these recommendations are different than almost anything I've seen in the PSC deliberations. You always talk about special interest groups with their oar in the water. MWERC's brought together a diversity of interests, and the fact that we have consensus on these things, to me, is nothing short of remarkable. So at that, Dan, I think I'll end and turn it over to our next panelist.
Thanks, Art. Next, I'd like to recognize Dan Terrence with Franklin Energy.
Good morning, and I would like to just agree with everything Art just said in regards to his accolades of the process, because it was really a good process to get to where we are, and I won't repeat all the great stuff you said, Art. But for me, Franklin Energy, just for perspective on where I'm coming from, we run energy efficiency demand response programs for utilities across the country. We're operating in more than 30 different states. Policy is important to the work that we do, because we're helping utilities develop programs and solutions for their customers to be more energy efficient. So policy has been an important piece for us, and why I served on the policy committee here and really got involved in this process. Back in 2008, Wisconsin was a top 10 on the ACEEE state scorecard. A lot of that was because of the legislation that was passed in 2007 that allowed for 1.2% of utility costs to get filtered into a statewide energy efficiency program. And that was groundbreaking leadership. The problem is that we haven't changed that in 13 years. And by standing still, Wisconsin has really taken a back seat to innovation and the changes that are happening in the utility and energy industry. Franklin Energy had about 140 employees back in 2008. Today, we have about 1,400 employees across the country. Our manpower in the state of Wisconsin is roughly the same. And most of that has been because of the support that we give to our programs across the country, and not necessarily because of programs that are operating here in the state. The 1.2% is now becoming just that cap. Focus on Energy has done a fantastic job of utilizing those funds. In fact, the evaluation shows that it's $3, $4 of benefit for every dollar invested. They've been very myopic on that cost effectiveness, and that has made Focus Energy program the most cost effective program in the country. So they're getting the most out of their dollars, but it's still capping the opportunity that we have here in the state of Wisconsin. If we look at other states, even ones close to us like Illinois and Michigan, that have gone from almost $0 on energy efficiency in 2008 to 2 to 3 times more than what we're spending in Wisconsin on a pro rata basis. They are showing a lot more innovation and what the opportunity is here. So, you know, part of being on the consumer consumption subcommittee was developing some specific recommendations to ensure that we're aligned with some of the goals that our utility in the state have around decarbonization, long-term goals like 80% by 2040, and even our governor's 100% clean energy goal by 2050. Let's make sure that we're doing what in our programs today and the next 4-year plan that align with being able to have a shot at achieving those goals. And if we look at the funding, again, it's really, let's open it up to be looking at energy efficiency that's cost effective and not a dollar amount necessarily that is the cap. And lastly, to try to combine and integrate energy efficiency and demand response programs. There's a lot of innovation around that integration. Smart thermostats is the easy one example that can bring in both energy efficiency and the control of that thermostat for demand response. And by not having coordinated approach, you lose some of the opportunities for being cost effective in helping customers be able to participate in today's, you know, kind of energy marketplace. So I'll stop there with my comments, and we can move on to next speakers.
Thanks, Dan. Next, I'd like to recognize Steve. Steve, are you on mute?
I am on mute. I have a really bad habit of doing that. I'm very appreciative, you know, of the sharing programs that actually tell me, hey, your microphone's on mute, buddy, turn it off. You know, reflecting back on, you know, Art's point earlier, how much the landscape has changed in the last 10 years and even more the last 5 years. And again, you know, as Dan said, part of the reason NTech Solutions was created out of faith is we see so much change happening within the energy world. And we wanted to provide more focus and more emphasis on that. So NTech was spun up. We're a wholly owned subsidiary of ENPTI, which also owns Faith. And we are the energy focused division of the company. So looking at energy delivery, distributed generation, looking at biofuels, biodigesting, biogas, and then, you know, what do we do with those assets also? You know, so to that end, you know, this has been a fantastic process. We need to look at what we do differently, right? Moving forward, we got aging generation assets. We're getting increased demand. We're seeing the need for greener power. And then the overall ability to handle all these load changes we're going to be seeing, you know, with EV charging, with increased electrical demand as we move from other fuel sources. It's been really great being involved in this this ideation process. You know, we have somewhat of a unique perspective from our side because dealing with the different entities we deal with, you know, we see this from the perspective of both the customers, energy generators, energy academia, governmental bodies, utilities. So all these people that, you know, that MWERC was able to pull together, you know, and through Doug's, you know, fantastic leadership in this opportunity, it was great to see you know, all of these bodies coming together to look at, you know, how do we come to a common understanding on how we need to move forward. You know, to Art's point, there's a tendency to silo ourselves. And I think Doug did a great job helping break down those silos, so we were able to kind of see we have different perspectives, but we really do have common goals. And the big thing, again, reflecting back to Dan and Art, is that ability that we were able to sit down and not seeing people talking over each other, but listening and understanding each other's perspectives, and then looking for ways that we could reach, you know, consensus and common understanding between that. And I think this project did a fantastic job with this. For us personally, as an organization, this process also has provided us with great guidance as we look at where we're going with product development, with system development. You know, for what features or goals or flexibility we need to provide and incorporate to be able to move forward with some of the things that we've talked about and that we've reached through this program. You know, our goal is trying to make energy easier for our clients, try to make it adaptable, flexible, future ready, if you will. And again, the knowledge that we've gained through this process really is going to help us to help them and really the greater system, you know, to utilize every electron possible to its best possible purpose and as reasonably as possible and in a way that benefits all involved. So we really appreciate the opportunity. And again, great work by everybody involved.
Thanks, Steve. And now I'd like to turn to Deb Irwin with Excel Energy.
Thanks. Well, I think we all thought about a number of the same things, but I'll try to add to the discussion. I think this really was a great process, and you know, building on the comment that Art made about silos, I think we all have so many people here working in Wisconsin, working hard to accelerate the clean energy transition, but we are working in silos, and so we're trying to come up with what we think is the best approach, and then we try to bring that forward, and oftentimes we're missing something that, you know, had we talked with some of the other stakeholders, you know, we would have had an even better result. And so I think what this process allowed us to do was to be the practical Wisconsinites that we all are, and, you know, look at the big picture, try to figure out, you know, what is the best approach to solving some of these big problems. I think we want a lot of the same things, and Steve, you just started talking about, you know, all of these stakeholders that are part of MWERC and we're part of this process. You know, we all want to accelerate the clean energy transition. We all want to take action when we see there's potential. We all want to do things efficiently, cost effectively. We want to preserve reliability. You know, everybody agrees on so many things. And I think when you have the opportunity to take a step back from the day-to-day and the things that you're working on in the immediate term and look at the big picture, we found there was a lot of common ground. And that's how you can get to, you know, consensus, true consensus recommendations, which is what this process got us to. You know, I think the reason that we wanted to build upon the system that we have, right? You know, we didn't want to be New York and Hawaii and, you know, throw the whole thing out and kind of start from scratch is because we are practical and we want to be efficient, right? I mean, it's not necessarily the most practical thing to throw out the 100-year-old electric system that we have and build something from scratch. You know, you want to do things that move in the direction and create opportunities where people are aligned and really seize on that and build on that, and then you can get momentum and, you know, kind of keep building on that and move forward. And one of those things really comes down to articulating what's important in order to build upon it. The opportunity to get funding, like we've talked about, like the earlier speakers talked about, securing funding from DOE or other opportunities like that to advance innovative technology in the Midwest, in the state. If everyone's out there on their own, right, trying to secure that type of funding, that can be a real challenge. But, like Dan was talking about before he turned it over to Art, the Innovative Technologies Initiative that the group is recommending is really an effort to be sort of cohesive and clear about the priorities, and get many stakeholders aligned behind those priorities, and be able to leverage that collective support to build momentum, to get more funding, to do the technology innovation and advancement that I think all of our stakeholders support. For example, for Xcel Energy, one of the things that we are very focused on is 100% carbon-free electric system, and we plan to be 80% carbon-free by 2030 using existing technology, essentially. However, that last 20% of carbon reduction is going to take additional technology innovation. That is not something that we can do at the big grid scale with technology that's commercially available today. And so, getting everyone to sort of take a step back, look at the big picture, and align behind things that we can all start moving towards to get to that clean energy future and create opportunities for everyone is really important and valuable. And I'll just stop there so we can leave a few minutes for questions, and there's probably some coming in on the chat.
Great. Thank you very much, Deb. So I'm going to kick off the questions with asking each of you to sort of highlight what you think is the most significant recommendation and why. If you could just sort of highlight, the recommendations and where you think, the most significant one is. So I'll start with you, Deb. Put you on the spot.
Sure. Thanks. Yeah. Doug talked earlier about the utility as the conductor, and of course I'm the utility person, so I'm going to say that's the most important one. But I think it's a really unique way of articulating what everyone is trying to get to, which is the most efficient, cost-effective, cleanest, reliable system for providing electricity, right? So this initiative was very focused on the distribution system. The utilities are very involved in the distribution system. There are many other players, customers, companies, vendors that feel they have solutions to improve the distribution system. But each of those participants can't just act of their own accord and solve the whole problem. And so it's really the recognition of it as a system, which seems obvious maybe when you say it that way, but the best solution is to continue to operate it as a system and have someone in a role really efficiently running that system, making sure that all of these opportunities are being realized for the benefit of everyone, and that the entity that is best positioned to do that because of their historical position and their infrastructure and their role and their job, it is the utility. And so, I think the idea of embracing that and building upon that creates a lot of opportunity instead of an antagonistic dynamic, right? So whereas in some states and stakeholder processes, you can see stakeholders arguing with the utility over the best way to approach, these technology solutions in the distribution system, to start from the place of understanding that this is the role we want the utility to play, I think really changes the dynamic of that conversation in a positive way to allow everyone to then move forward and say, okay, if the utility is playing this role, then what does that mean? Things will need to change, but sort of that foundation of the utility as the conductor, I think just really embodies sort of the collaborative effort that this group had and the desire to work together to advance the technology and distribution system.
Great. Steve? You're on mute again.
So Deb kind of stole my thunder because I was going to say on that also, because again, I think the best thing that came out of this was the fact that we're developing that view that the utility's in the best position to do that, right? They're the best to conduct or be the traffic manager, as it will. If you look at all these distributed energy resources across the grid, and on top of that too is, while we like to look at generation and maybe what I can do behind the meter if I'm a client, at the same time, they like having that confidence that there's something else to back that up if they need that. And that's what the utilities help provide to us. So at the same time, I agree that understanding that we need that, and the utility is that logical manager of that because they've been fulfilling that role on a larger scale for years. What we're now asking them to do is try and provide that on a smaller scale, right? And to do that, we need to make sure that we give them the correct tools and the needed tools to be able to handle that so they can understand what they have available and how to manage those activities. So I agree, from that aspect. Absolutely. I think that's one of the most important things coming out of this.
Dan?
My neighbor decided it's a good time to mow his lawn, so sorry about that. Hopefully you can hear me better than I can hear you.
We can hear you fine.
Awesome. I think it's a combination of 6 and 7. I talked a little bit about it in my opening remarks, but it's ensuring that what we're doing today is aligned with the long-term goals of our utilities in our state, and then providing the funding necessary to be able to achieve that rather than setting an arbitrary number from a budget perspective. And let's look at it more from the perspective of what can we do that is cost effective, and let that be the rule of how we determine what's invested in helping our customers, both homeowners and business owners across the state, to participate in the opportunity that exists here in the energy marketplace.
Right. Art?
It's a tie for me in terms of most important, Dan. I think the number 3, which is encouraging utilities to use innovative technology, I think that was a very important and it makes some recommendations for amount that should be set aside for that purpose. The significance of that is not only that as a recommendation, but look at the 11 goals that the committee has come out with, which should guide those deployments. That was heavily discussed and negotiated, and I think those goal statements should give a lot of comfort to disparate interests, about how this money is spent if you look at those 11 goals. So that's important, I think. And the other important recommendations are 9 and 10. As we look for customers to maybe accept more risk on the market with some innovative tariffs, one of the challenges has been access to information on the wholesale markets in terms of pricing, et cetera. And those 2 recommendations, 9 and 10, I think are going to be very important to try to incentivize more transparency between MISO, the utilities, and customers about access to real-time pricing in the wholesale markets, because that will stimulate effective, real-time market rates and customer participation with more transparency. So those are my thoughts, Dan.
Great. We have a question from the group. In terms of building consensus and making progress, is increasing the funding of the Focus Energy program a large common interest that MWERC can and should prioritize and promote?
Well, Dan, I would kind of send that question to you. Yeah, I mean, as an MWERC member, right, and you said it earlier, MWERC doesn't have a tendency to take strong policy positions, and that's been something, historically. But I think, the whole idea of this initiative, and I don't want, you can speak to this, was, bringing together all the stakeholders who do have a tendency to take positions on stuff and have opinions on policy, and see if we could get some consensus. And so, as one of the recommendations, I think you would see consensus support from those who participated, but I'm not sure about MWERC itself.
Yeah. I would agree with that, Deb. I mean, I think, we have been, we've tried to be very clear that we're not an advocacy organization. But I do think, and I would actually tee this up for our two co-chairs of the policy committee, for our next meeting, maybe sort of explore, this a little bit. I'm not suggesting that we change that, but I think there are some other things, and Deb, you a couple times during the process have suggested there might be some other ways that MWERC can continue to provide some value, that would be short of advocacy, but continuing these efforts. So we can certainly explore that through the policy committee going forward. Okay, I see that we're up at 11:01. It's pretty close to our target of 11. So I want to thank the panel very much for your presentations today and your leadership throughout this process. Thanks. I want to thank once again, Doug, Scott, for your partnership and for your presentation here today. I would like to recognize Emily Ott, who has been the quarterback behind the scenes. Job well done, Emily. I think it's gone off without a hitch. At least I didn't see any hitches. You might have seen some, but I didn't. So thank you for that. And just like to thank all of our members for your continued support. And we're really looking forward to an exciting last 6 months of 2021. So Alan, did you have anything you wanted to add?
In closing, I would like to thank the entire policy committee under your leadership and with Doug's support for this funded activity that the Great Plains Institute afforded. I think it continues to demonstrate how we look at technology driving policy and how technology and the skill sets that people put together to execute make a difference for Wisconsin. So I'm excited by the work and look forward to the recommendations being part of the dialogue at the Public Service Commission.
Great. That brings our program to a close. Thank you all for your time and attention today, and we look forward to working with you in the coming months. Everybody be safe. Thanks.
Thanks.